This video is about a new California Air Tools compressor that I just got. It's an ultra quiet version to replace this old thing that I had kludged together years ago from parts. My wife asked if I could do something about the sound from it, and it's really loud when you're sitting in the living room above it. And it starts out when you first start it up. It's not too bad. I've got a brand new gauge here for measuring the decibels, and it's all calibrated and everything, so I knew everything would be right. But when you first start it up there, you can see it's like 87, 88 decibels, which really is pretty loud. And then if you let it run as it gets up to the higher pressure, because it does go up to like 135 psi, you'll hear over time that it just keeps getting louder and louder, and finally it does get up over 100 decibels, which really is quite loud. And I mean, it was loud upstairs too, because there's no insulation between the floor, and there you can see it's up to 101, 101.4, 101.9. So it was quite loud, and it was going throughout the whole house, and it did make the shop uncomfortable. So I decided to look for something that was quiet. And I found these California Air Tools compressors, and I looked at it on Home Depot one day, this brand 2 horsepower 20-gallon model, and it was like $550. And then all of a sudden the next day I looked at it again, and it dropped to $440, so I decided to order one and try it. And there you can see I just figured I'd do the dust collector. That's about 85, 86 decibels at 3 feet. So, it's much loud. It was over 90 before, so it's much quieter now the way it is. But I decided to try one of these California Air Tool compressors, and I ordered it. A couple days later it arrived, and you see the FedEx truck just dropped it off, and this is what the box looked like when it arrived. All ripped up, torn up. I asked the guy if he could just note it on the receipt, and he said, nope, they don't do that anymore. Just call the office if you have a problem. And this is how everything I get delivered from UPS and FedEx that's, large like this arrives. They just beat the hell out of everything. I don't know how they get away with it. But anyhow, I, opened it up. Luckily, there was an interior cardboard packaging in there, and the wheels had bounced around. The shipment, that other box also had bounced around, or the other bag, I mean. So I just carefully, cut this open and decided to look it over good. I figured there'd be damage on it or something like that, but it turned out that outer cardboard layer was never pierced. Apparently they just must have grabbed onto or the inner layer was never pierced. They must have just grabbed onto the outer layer and shredded it apart or something. Try to tape it back together. But inside, the thing was still good. I'm just dragging out of there. You see it had a plastic bag around it too, and the only damage to it that I could find on it were a couple of scuff marks where it looked like those wheels had bounced around right down there where they were sitting. You can see just a couple scuff marks on the paint, but I went over it real good, and there was no actual damage, so I was happy about that. So just a matter of flipping it down then and putting the wheels on. There's some wheels and some vibration pads that go on it, and it does weigh a little bit over 100 pounds, so it is fairly heavy. Both of the plugs from the compressor pump that were supposed to plug the input ports were missing. One was laying in a bag in the bottom, and there was nothing at all in the other one, so I don't know if they were out. That one was missing from the factory or what. And as I said, everything was really no damage to it, so I was pretty lucky. And the wheels are real easy to put on. They just have a shoulder screw that goes in with a washer that goes in between there to just space it out, and then a nut and lock washer on the inside. So that only takes a couple seconds. And then there were just 2 rubber bumpers that wound up being packed in the bag also, that go on the front there, just with a bolt up from the bottom and a nut on there. So the assembly of this is really super simple, and I just got it out of the box here. You can stand it up, and it does roll really nice now. And you can see there's a couple of mufflers that have to, or input filters that have to be put on there, and they just screw in place. There's some little tubes that go in them, and when I screwed the first one in, it was actually facing to the side there. You can see, and those two ports were supposed to be plugged, I think, from the factory, but they weren't, so I don't know if anything could have gotten in there, but I doubt it. It was in a plastic bag. But the two hoses came out pointing to the side like that, and I wound up having to just snap the cap off and then fight with it to get it back on, because it really wasn't round. It was kind of oblong. But once I got it on, I was able to get those two hoses at least pointed down there, the way they showed them in the instructions. So that's really it for the assembly of this. It's real simple. Everything went together pretty good, and it's time to just roll it around down to my shop. And that's when the aggravation started. I plugged it in, turned it on, filled it up with air, and I hear this hiss coming out of it. And I see the gauge going down. I'm like, what the heck? It must be a loose fitting. And I checked on it, and I found that there's this cast aluminum manifold that ties everything together back there. And there's a really bad leak in there. There's like a bad spot in it where they cast it on the parting line. And they say these are assembled and tested in the United States. I can tell you now, this definitely wasn't tested, because anybody would have caught that. It leaked down so fast, and it it was quite noisy. So that was definitely a lie in their brochure. Now, they do say that the pumps are supposed to last 3,000 hours too, so I'm not sure whether or not I'm gonna believe that either right now after seeing this. But anyhow, I was ready to pack it up and take it back to Home Depot and tell them to get me another one, but I saw they had a phone number for California Air Tools that you could call, and I gave them a call, and I talked to a nice guy who was working from home, and he said, just send me some photos and a picture of the proof of purchase on it, and I'll take care of it. So a couple days later, I sent him that stuff, and a couple days later in the mail, I actually had a replacement manifold assembly there to swap out for it. So you can see they wound up having to replace that whole manifold. But, at this point I really wasn't happy, because it's another one of these out-of-box experiences where, you expect things that are high-end like this to be right. But they really aren't. And you do have to take them apart. So here's the part that came. And I immediately noticed that they did put a different fitting on the input of it for the air hose. But it looked like the same part. And luckily they shipped it assembled, because there was no way to get like the plugs out of the old one and swap them over or anything. So the worst part was getting the airline off, and this one that came on it had an airline with a compression nut on it and like a big lump on the fitting. That really was a beast to get the airline off of. And when I looked at it, the new one had just a slip-in fitting, and I wasn't really sure if it was the same size, but I figured I'm just gonna cut the end off and put it in there. But I got that air hose off, and then just a matter of one bolt with a spacer from the front, and then there are two socket head cap screws up from the bottom, and the whole assembly just slides right out of there. I guess I just can't really understand how they could let something like this go out the door that way, because it was definitely, a noticeable leak, and it was definitely in there at the time they assembled it, because it was a bad casting. So anyhow, we're swapping this out now, and once I get it out here, get those bolts out, you'll see that the hose fitting is different. And it turns out that the one that came on it actually had a very tiny orifice in it, and wouldn't flow much air or anything anyway. And I think that's why they changed to the slip-in fitting on the new one. So I'm gonna have to see if I can find a new fitting for the tank to match too, because the way it is here like this from the factory, you probably couldn't use an impact tool or any kind of air tools with it. It's more for nail guns and blow guns and stuff like that, maybe filling tires, because you can see right there that that one there is on that fitting. And the ID of that fitting is just so tiny, and that's your whole airflow. And here's the new one. You can see that's got a wide open flow from the factory, and there's the one that came off. And if you look down in there, it's got like a 0.09 or less than 1/8 inch diameter orifice. So, you know, it's really is not a compressor from the factory that's made for any kind of a high flow tool like an impact gun. And there you can see the end of it. I just took a pair of these snippers and cut it off. I was hoping it was, you know, be the same size tubing, and luckily it was. So I cut that spot that they must have heat formed to get on there. And then luckily the hose slipped right into the new fitting, no problem, no leaks, no nothing. So, you know, I'm definitely going to have to look for a new fitting for the bottom to get the flow up on this thing. And I decided to just leave it hanging out there and turn it on and just run up like 50 pounds of air in it, just so I could go over it really good before I put it back in with the soap mixture, just to, you know, double check everything for leaks and, you know, make sure I don't have another defective one. So I went over it all, and you know, I couldn't really find any leaks in it or anything. This one looked good, so, you know, I was halfway happy now, at least. So I will say that their customer support, you know, even though they were working from home, they were great. I only had to stay on hold for, you know, maybe about 5 or 10 minutes until, you know, somebody finally picked it up. And I think it was because they were just transferring it to the guy's home. And then once I got an email off, the next day I got a shipping notice for the parts. So, you know, they do have tremendous customer service, and I don't know if they have to because they ship out many units like this or what, but you know, it's definitely something that would keep me at this point from recommending this unit until I see how it works for a while. So putting it back together, same thing. There's the 2 socket head cap screws that come up from the bottom, and then there's the 1 screw from the face. So I just started the 2 socket head screws, left them loose, and then I put the that 1 bolt in from the face, tighten that up to pull it in flush, and then squared everything up and just tighten the bottom ones up. But it really didn't take all that long to switch over. And I was just you know, just getting excited to start using it by now, because I had pulled the other one out already. Now when I was, you know, searching for a new compressor, this one actually showed as having a 3,000 hour compressor life, and all the other quiet ones showed as having between a 50 and 500 hour guaranteed life. So, you know, this really seems like it must be a much higher quality technology, and we'll see how it stands up over time, like I said. But, you know, with those hoses on it that feed this quick connect setup here from the factory, you're definitely not going to get enough flow for any kind of a tool that requires, you know, any kind of CFM. And this actually was supposed to be from 95 to 125 psi cut on to cut off pressure. And I'll show you that in a minute. And there you can see a porous spot right through there. That whole slot, there's like a slot of holes in the casting there. So I just, you know, decided to turn it on and just get a reading on it. And about 3 foot away from it, you can see it's right around 75 decibels, which is, I think it's a little bit more than what they rated at. But so then I decided to just, I'm pulling that valve there to let all the air out of it down to 0, so I can just show you how long it takes to fill up from 0, because a lot of people ask questions like that. So I'm just going to start it up and let it run. And one thing I noticed was the first 35 seconds, it's got a different sound than the rest of the time. It starts, and there's a electric solenoid valve that bleeds off all the air coming out of the pump, and allows the pump to get up to speed and warmed up and everything before it shuts and starts pumping air. So you notice right at about the 35-second point that the sound of it just completely changes, the whole pitch and everything else. and then at that point it actually starts doing the filling of the tank. So I figure while I'm waiting here, I'll just kind of try to get a couple decibel readings on it next. And this is, I'm going to walk over to where my new bench is going to be. I'm kind of got everything ripped apart now, but over in this corner here, and with the compressor running, I'm just getting a reading of 62, which basically is, you know, it's the sound of your voice just about. So that's really going to be great. And up in the house, I'm getting even less. And then once I start walking back over to it, you can see it'll go up to about 75 when I get 3 feet from it. So it's, you know, it's right about at specs, and the fill-up time here is what was it, about 4 minutes and 42 seconds till it went from 0 psi to actually it turned out it was 118 psi. It's supposed to be set 120 to 125, they said, and turned out it was about 118. So I decided to set that up a little bit, and I noticed that the 2 gauges are both different pressures on this one. Even with the regulator wide open there, they should be the same, but the regulated one is actually 2 psi higher than the other one. So I took the cover off the switch there. You pull out the plug first, and then there's instructions on there how to raise the cut in, the cut out, both the cut in and cut out at the same time, and just the cut out. So I set that up. I just turned it a little bit, tweaked it, and let it out till it went down to about 95 and started. And just wanted to make sure, you know, what I had it set at. And this time when it cranked up, it did go up to about 123. So I figured that's a good spot. So everything's, you know, all done now, put together, and I figured I'm going to just put a piece of tape on there with a mark on the gauge and let it sit for, I let it sit actually for about 18 or 19 hours after this. And I went back and checked it, and you can see this thing's got the regulator built right into it. So if anything ever happens with that regulator, you're kind of screwed. You have to replace the whole assembly. So that's, you know, one other feature of it that I really don't like. It would be nice if it was just something you could screw in and replace, but I do have a couple extra quick connects now and 2 gauges to, just in case something goes wrong with the ones that are there. And I went back 18 hours later, and you can see it did drop maybe about 3 psi, but I think that's actually just from it cooling down. The air in the tank, you know, after you pump it up, it does cool down and drops a little bit. Because I went over it totally with bubbles, and I couldn't find any leaks. So I'm going to say that, you know, right now, as of now, is totally leak-free and running good. So in the end, I just can't understand how FedEx and UPS both can destroy boxes, and I've had them destroy a lot of product on me also, and just try to tape it back together and say there's nothing wrong. And, you know, as you can see, right out of the box, this was bad, and it means it was never actually tested at the factory before it left. So, you know, it did turn into a little bit of an extra hassle. And, you know, it really makes me wonder about a product when they ship something out like that and they don't, you know, they tell you it was supposed to be tested. So the jury's still out on this one. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe.